Welcome to the Listening Time Podcast. Hey everybody, this is Connor, and you're listening to episode 165 of the Listening Time Podcast. I hope you're all doing great, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the topics that people ask about the most related to English. As an English teacher, this question is probably one of the top 3 questions that I receive, and that is how to learn phrasal verbs in English. So if you don't know what a phrasal verb is, and I think that many of you already know what these are, but a phrasal verb is a phrase with a verb and a preposition. So for example, look up. Right? I looked up the information. That's a phrasal verb. So these phrasal verbs cause English learners a lot of difficulty. And one of the reasons why is because we have so many phrasal verbs in English. Literally hundreds, if not thousands of phrasal verbs. And so there are tons of these phrasal verbs, and people have trouble with them because they might not have them in their own language, and it's kind of a new concept, and they aren't really sure how to approach phrasal verbs and how to think about them. And so in this episode, I want to give you my advice on how to learn phrasal verbs. And then I'm going to tell you about how I'm going to help you do that. So make sure that you listen to this whole episode, because I'm going to talk about something that I'm going to do to give you practice with these phrasal verbs. Okay? So I'm sure this will be an interesting topic for this episode today. And before we start, remember that if you need my help to understand native speakers when they speak fast, if you can understand me, but you can't understand other English speakers when they speak, then I recommend that you join my membership so that you can get my listening practice seminars in which I help you train with the different sound patterns in English. I help you understand different phrases and words that might be hard to understand for many people. So you get that, and if you become a Listening Time family member, then you also get my advanced podcast episodes in which I speak at normal speed. So with that, you can practice listening to English when it's spoken at normal speed. So the link to that is in the description down below. And then I'll also put the link to my US Conversations podcast down below. If you feel ready to practice listening to 2 people talking instead of just one, then make sure to sign up for my US Conversations podcast. It's a lot of fun. You get to hear me talk to different people from around the country about different topics. It's really educational, and it's great practice for your listening. So make sure to sign up. And of course, you have the transcript for this episode down below as well. All right, let's get started.
Are your ears ready? You know what time it is. It's listening time.
Okay, let's talk about how to learn phrasal verbs in English. So first, let me just tell you how you should view phrasal verbs, how you should think about these phrases. So you should think of phrasal verbs as individual vocabulary phrases. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, you should treat these phrasal verbs as any other vocabulary word that you come across when you're learning English. Okay? So, for example, the phrasal verb look up that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you should just treat that phrase as a new vocabulary word. just like the word, illuminate. So let's say you don't know the word illuminate, and then you hear it and you look it up, and then now you're a little more familiar with the word illuminate. You would do the same thing with the phrase look up. Okay? Just treat it as a vocabulary phrase, so to say. So you should think of them as just normal vocabulary, and you should make sure that you're not trying to associate these phrasal verbs with each other. So what I mean by that is when you see a phrasal verb with the verb get, like get up, for example, you shouldn't think that that's in any way related to other phrasal verbs with the verb get, like get off or get through, for example. So this is the big mistake that many people make with phrasal verbs. They group them into these categories of, okay, phrasal verbs with get up, get off, get on, get around, and they try to memorize the differences between the different get phrasal verbs, for example. And I highly recommend that you don't do that. Different phrasal verbs that share the same verb, they're not related to each other. And native speakers don't associate them with each other. So just because two phrasal verbs have the same verb doesn't mean that they're related. Okay? Just get that idea out of your head and treat each phrasal verb as an individual vocabulary phrase that is unrelated to any other phrasal verb. Okay? And let me just mention that native speakers don't even know what phrasal verbs are. If you ask a native speaker about phrasal verbs, they're going to look at you with confusion because they don't know what these are. They don't even realize that they're using them. I've explained the concept of phrasal verbs to native English speakers before, and it takes them a few seconds to understand what I'm saying, and then they say, oh, I've never realized that we use these phrases. So native speakers don't even know what they are, even though they know things like verb tenses, and they might know what adjectives are and things like that. And that's because these phrasal verbs shouldn't be viewed as like a grammar concept, like prepositions and conjunctions and adjectives and phrasal verbs. No, native speakers say these phrases without even realizing that they're saying two words, a verb and a preposition together with a phrase. They just feel like they're using normal words. So you should do the same thing. You should just feel like you're using a normal vocabulary word when you use a phrasal verb. And if you do this and you understand this point, then the logical conclusion is that you need to learn phrasal verbs just like you learn normal vocabulary. Okay? There's no difference here. You should treat them like you treat normal vocabulary. You don't need to view them as this big separate topic that requires tons of explicit instruction to understand phrasal verbs. No, just treat them like normal vocabulary words. But in this case, there are 2 words or 3 words that are part of this whole vocabulary phrase, right? So now, how do you learn normal vocabulary? Since I mentioned that you should learn these phrasal verbs like you learn normal vocabulary, how do you learn vocabulary? Well, the most effective way, in my experience, is to learn vocabulary in context, not lists. Okay? So when you hear vocabulary words that are new for you and you hear them in context when someone is speaking or when you're reading something, this will be your introduction to that word. And then you'll probably look it up and you'll probably forget it shortly after that. But then you'll come across that same word again in the future, and you might remember having seen it before, but you have forgotten what it means. And then you look it up again and say, oh yeah, I remember that now. And then that will probably happen again. And that might happen many times before you eventually learn it and it just sticks. When we say that something sticks, this means that it stays in that place and doesn't go away. So eventually it will stick once you've heard it in context enough times. Okay? It's really simple. There isn't some crazy science behind learning new words. You just have to hear them frequently enough and with enough meaning behind them until they eventually stick. Okay? So when it comes to phrasal verbs, you need to do the same thing, right? You need to notice when someone says one and you don't understand it, and then you look it up. You probably forget it after that, but then you'll hear it again if you're doing a good amount of listening practice, and then you'll probably have to do the same thing, and then you might forget it again, but you just treat it like a normal vocabulary word, okay? You don't have to study these separately and create lists of phrasal verbs that you go through and try to memorize. No, learn them through your listening practice. Learn them through your reading, okay? And yes, there is one technical aspect of phrasal verbs, and that is that some of them are separable and some of them are inseparable, meaning that with some of them, you can put the object between the two words, and with some of them, you can't put the object between the two words. For example, I can say, put down the weapon, or put the weapon down, because that phrasal verb is separable. However, I can only say, I ran into Mary at the store. I can't say, I ran Mary into at the store. So that phrasal verb is inseparable. So there is that technical aspect of phrasal verbs, but even this technical aspect is learned through repeated exposure. Okay? When you hear this phrase used in context enough, eventually you'll know how to say it. Can you separate it? Should it not be separated? It's just like vocabulary. Eventually you hear it enough, and the meaning sticks and it feels natural for you to use. So in summary, you should learn phrasal verbs naturally through exposure, through listening and reading, and don't worry about them and create all these lists and memorize them like that. I wouldn't recommend that, because that doesn't work well for vocabulary, and it doesn't work well in the sense that you're probably going to start to associate the different phrasal verbs with each other, right? All the get phrasal verbs or all the go phrasal verbs. And one other thing I forgot to mention is that students often ask me, why do you put up with the word get there? What does the word up mean? And they try to separate the meaning of the two words, the verb and the preposition. And that's something that you need to get out of your mind immediately. Okay? Just forget the fact that it has these two words, and don't separate these two words and say, why does break go with down here. Why down and not out or whatever? Like, don't do that. Just learn the phrase as one vocabulary phrase that you don't analyze for its individual words. Okay? So learn phrasal verbs naturally through exposure. I know that some people don't like this answer, this advice. They want some interesting trick or tip in order to learn certain things in English, but I'm just being honest here. This is how you learn them. But now, let me give you some good news, and that is that I have a plan to help you get this exposure to phrasal verbs in a natural way and to start to learn them through listening. And my plan is that I want to start to do a second podcast episode every week. But in this other episode, I want to focus on phrasal verbs. However, it's not going to be just me talking about the phrasal verb and giving you a big explanation and instructional lesson about that phrasal verb. I'll introduce them and give you their meanings, and then I'm going to talk naturally about something else. I'm not sure yet. Maybe I'll talk about topics like I do in these episodes, or maybe I'll tell stories or talk about different experiences, or maybe I'll just make things up. I don't know. When you make something up, this means that you invent something. So maybe I'll just make something up. I don't know yet, but I do know that I will just talk, and I will include these phrasal verbs that we're looking at in that particular episode in my speech when I'm talking. And I'll include them multiple times in different sentences in a natural way. So for example, maybe the phrasal verb is act up, okay? And we're looking at two different meanings of that phrasal verb. And one meaning is when some machine doesn't work correctly and it has some mechanical issues, like my engine is acting up. And then we're also looking at another meaning of act up, which is when kids are not behaving well and they're kind of throwing tantrums or being disobedient or whatever. We can say, my son has been acting up all week. And maybe we want to practice with those two meanings of that phrasal verb. And so maybe I'll tell a story about a time when both my engine and my son were acting up, and I'll just talk naturally, but you'll hear these phrasal verbs included in my story, for example. That's just an example. I don't know if it will be exactly like that, but I'm just giving you the idea of what I'm going to do. And so with these episodes, you're going to get the same listening practice that you're getting in my normal episodes, because I'm going to be talking to you in English. I'll talk slowly and clearly, like in these episodes. And I plan on providing the transcript too, I think. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think I will. And so you're getting extra listening practice, but with this listening practice, you're also getting the benefit of hearing these phrasal verbs used in a natural context and repeated multiple times during the episode. And so this is my idea. I hope you like this idea, and I hope you see the purpose behind this, right? To have more listening practice, but specifically to expose you to phrasal verbs in a natural way and in a repetitive way. And so there are many phrasal verbs in English. Like I mentioned, hundreds, if not thousands of them. So I will definitely have enough phrasal verbs to last me a lifetime of podcast episodes. So I don't know how many phrasal verbs we'll focus on in each episode. Maybe just a couple. I don't know. And then I'll do my best to just naturally include those in the episode. And so you can practice your listening just like you do with these episodes, but with those phrasal verbs sprinkled in. When we say that something is sprinkled in something else or somewhere else, we're saying that you can find it in different places in that thing. Okay, so I'll sprinkle in those phrasal verbs and repeat them, and that'll help you start to get familiar with these different phrasal verbs in a natural way without me just presenting these different phrasal verbs to you and saying, okay, today we're going to look at get up, get off, and get on. This is what this one means. This is what the other one means. Let's look at example sentences. Obviously, like I said, I'm going to introduce them to you and give you an example sentence or example sentences probably. But then after that, it'll just be listening practice with those phrasal verbs mixed in. Okay? I think you get the point, right? I've repeated myself a few times here, but I just want to explain to you how this type of episode fits in with my philosophy on how to learn phrasal verbs. Because like I mentioned, I don't think you should focus on them as just something you need to memorize in lists. You should learn them through listening and through reading. So that's my idea. And I think that these episodes will be a little bit shorter than my normal episodes. I don't know exactly how long they'll be yet, but they'll be a little shorter than these episodes. And I hope to be able to give you the transcript as well. I'm not sure about that, but I think I'm going to try to do that. And I think the topics will be a little bit more constrained. What I mean by that is I kind of have to make sure that I can fit these phrasal verbs into my topic. So I don't think the topics will be as free and open as some of my topics that I talk about in these normal episodes, because I have to strategically talk about things that allow me to use that phrasal verb or those two phrasal verbs, right? So the topics will be a little more constrained. I might have to tell more stories and give more experiences instead of just general topics. I don't know. We'll see. But it'll be a little bit different in that way. But really, the practice is the same for you. You don't have to do anything different, right? You just listen and use the transcript if you need to, repeat the episode, and you'll be getting exposed to phrasal verbs while you do that. So that's pretty cool, right? I think I'm going to try to release these phrasal verb episodes on Fridays. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think I'm going to do that. And I'm going to see if people like them. I'm going to look at the statistics and see if the download numbers are the same and people are responding well to these phrasal verb episodes. And if they end up not being that popular, then I'll just stop them, right? I don't need to commit to continuing these episodes forever. I'm going to try this out. This is a new idea, and I think it'll be helpful for people. But if I see that people aren't as interested in them, then I'm just going to stop. So know that I'm not committing to doing this forever. I'm going to try it out for a little while. And if you like them, and if people like them as much as the normal episodes, then I'll continue with this idea. So we'll see. Probably after a couple months, I'll take a look at the statistics and make the decision. But let's try it out. I've received so many questions about phrasal verbs, and I always tell people that you need to learn them through natural exposure, listening and reading. And now I feel like it's time that I give that practice, that natural exposure. So I hope that you are excited about that, and that you'll actually like those episodes, and we'll see how it goes. So that's it for today. I hope that this episode was interesting for you. And remember that if you need my help to understand native speakers when they speak fast, then make sure to join my membership so you can get my specialized training that will help you listen better. And if you become a Listening Time family member, you'll get my advanced podcast episodes as well. So the link to that is down below. And you can also sign up for my US Conversations podcast to practice listening to two people talking instead of just one. That's the next challenge that you need to give yourself to help you reach the level at which you can understand native speakers in any context. So the link to that is also down below. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of Listening Time.